Hey everyone, welcome to the Not a Lonely Coffee Break podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Megan, and we are a podcast about coffee and work, but make it queer.
I feel like our new sort of catchphrase going into this segment is, so speaking of queer,
Let's talk about it.
we are going to a concert tomorrow. It will be quite the gay environment. We are going to a Fletcher concert.
Okay.
If you know who Fletcher is, you know. If you don't know, then I encourage you to give her a listen.
I don't know Fletcher, so I'm gonna have to give it a listen.
Yeah, you're gonna have to give her a listen. She's a whole vibe. But I'm also feeling a little nervous about it though, because I have seen online that sometimes her audiences are a little rambunctious. So I'm just really hoping that is not the case. Yeah, it should be fun. So we're gonna go to the Fletcher concert and rock out to some gay tunes.
Cute.
And we also have Pride Frisco coming up.
Oh, yes?
Yeah, they host a variety of events throughout the year. They do an annual Pride Festival, usually in October, which I'm really grateful for because the weather is so much nicer.
Right. June is a bit hot.
Yeah. But they have some really awesome sort of vendors lined up that are going to be there with some awesome resources Sunday afternoon where you can hang out with your friends and get to know some queer-friendly organizations that maybe you didn't know about before.
And possibly see us. We don't have a table, but we are planning to be there to meet people, basically connect. So if you see our beautiful faces there, then don't hesitate to stop us.
Yeah, say hi to us.
Make us feel famous, please.
Make us feel important if you see us at the Pride
And
Frisco
I'll give
event.
you a sticker. So I went to the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. So when I first went, I was going with my sister, and I just thought it was a Holocaust museum, just to kind of touch on, the issues and the lives that were affected. And I realized it says, and human rights. And I was like, ooh, I'm interested. Okay, let's hear this. And so I go in, and if you guys haven't been, highly recommend it. The way it's set up is it's outlined, it does, the walkthrough is a really good timeline to see what led up to the Holocaust, the political issues leading up to it, the people who were affected, the families that were separated, and then also how the allies didn't always step up. So there was just a lot of allies that were kind of bystanders and not really doing too much to help. It was really interesting to see because it's kind of in my mind, it's let's not repeat history, right? Let's not. The point is that all human lives are sacred and they're valuable, and to make sure that we're fighting for everyone who is in danger. So once you get past that, there's a human rights section, and I was obviously it's an emotional experience, but you go into the human rights section and it talks about other genocides that have happened in human history.
Yeah, that section always hits me when I see it.
So it's really because they talk about the warning signs of what leads up to genocides against other groups of people. Interactive activities, and those interactive activities, it has basically a way for you to go in and see all sorts of civil rights issues. So
thinking about human rights and rights of people, and just continuing to reflect on our last conversation we had about boundaries. This week you and I did something kind of interesting for the show. Listeners, Megan and I had to do some solo work just because of scheduling conflicts for recording. Megan was not able to participate in our interview segment. You were missed, Megan. You were missed.
Okay. Next time.
But stuff happens. Yeah, stuff happens. Stuff comes up. And we had a great guest. So yeah, I reached out to someone that I met not too long ago. She is the owner of Do Good Book, which is a community-focused pop-up bookshop in the DFW area. And we were just chatting about some of her books and some of the initiatives. And then she casually mentions to me, "Oh, yeah, I used to be in HR." And I was like, "Stop. You were not. Say more. How do you feel about podcasts? Do you want to chat with us? We would love to get your perspective as someone who was in that space." And so she loved that idea. We are joined by Alissa from Do Good Book. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you join us.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
First, can you tell us a little bit about just who you are, your background, maybe a little bit about Do Good Books?
Yeah, absolutely. I started my career in human resources. I went to college. I took one of those personality tests that tells you what you're supposed to do with your life, and HR was one of those choices, and I kind of just ran with it. Spent a little more than 12 years in the human resources space. So kind of really dove right in. I was a generalist, so I touched a little bit of everything. So I started my career in construction, which was interesting to start there. Moved into kind of financial services, insurance, but I've always been in that corporate like setting. And a couple years ago, I was just extremely burnt out. I mean, going through the pandemic in HR, trying to maneuver
Oh
policies,
my
and
gosh,
it was
yes.
quite a bit. So I was very thankful that I was able to just take a career pause. I have two small kids, so just being able to focus on them and spend time with my family, and not being chained to my phone 24/7, because in HR things happen, off
I
off
know.
hours, and so that's kind of part of that job, and I love that part, being there for the employees, but it it weighs on you for sure. So I was just at a place where I couldn't do that corporate world any longer in that space. And so kind of taking that career pause, I thought, well, what are things I'm passionate about? So I started baking again. I started reading again, and like found these things that actually make me happy that I didn't have time for. And so that's how Do Good Book came about. Do Good Books is a pop-up bookshop here in the DFW area. And so we'll go around to different markets to share books, obviously, is our main thing. But one of my main goals with Do Good Books was to do good, read good books, and support good organizations. And so I'm trying to bring, I kind of say these are my three pillars. So trying to give back to our community is a huge component of what I wanted to do with this. Do Good Books. So a portion of every purchase goes to local nonprofits that are doing good in our community. So I really wanted to make a huge focus on the community aspect and support, especially the smaller nonprofits that maybe don't get so much funding from big donors or whatever it may be. So just sharing their mission too. I started out about a year ago, and it's just been so much fun.
Sure. Yeah, no, for sure. And that's how we met. Was you were at a pop-up event for an organization that we both support. And so that's how we kind of got to know each other and chat a little bit. And one reason why I wanted to have you on the show, Megan and I have been touching a little bit on the importance for people to establish boundaries, not just, around taking care of yourself, but also around kind of their queer identity or just their identity in general. And so, when we were chatting, I was like, oh my gosh, it would be so awesome to get someone to kind of share how important HR is in helping people be their authentic selves in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, HR kind of seems scary. At least my experience is we
For
seem
sure.
scary to so many people, and no one wants to go to HR or talk to HR, which I get, right? But at the same time, I want people to make sure that they're comfortable with their HR. I mean, they are there to advocate for the employees just as much as they're advocating for the organization. For me as an HR person, I wanted to make sure that I was there for the employees. I mean, I think everybody wants to be in an organization where they're enjoying what they do. That's part of the nature of work, right? We don't always love what we're doing, but if we're enjoying the people that we're with, if we're enjoying the environment, like those things, I think play a huge factor into your happiness, your work life happiness, and your balance there.
No, I know that a lot of times people are fearful to open up to HR. And some of this is kind of even my own perspective and experience, even with HR. And sometimes we feel like if we take certain things to them, that they are keeping a low-key file on us for things that they can use later on to give us a write-up or terminate our employment. And so I just know that that's a common fear that a lot of people have, is that idea that HR isn't really there for the employees.
And I have been in environments where that has been the culture that I've come in, but I think there are some really great HR people out there that's not the case. That's not how they are, even if you maybe don't know them. And so I think just starting out, if you see them in the break room, just try to have some conversations and build that rapport. If they're not doing that with you, which I hope that they would be doing that with their employees, but I mean, just start small. And I think being comfortable with one HR person is extremely valuable to you as the employee, and being able to trust them. And I think, to an extent, definitely coming to HR with any concerns you have. I mean, we're there to listen. It's kind of being a counselor, right? We're here to help you through workplace issues.
Absolutely.
My role, the way I took it was, I'm just going to give you some advice on how to approach the situation. And then you come back to me if you need me to help get involved from a more serious, perspective. If you need me to interject, if you need me to sit down with you and your boss, I can do that. But here's some tools to help you solve it on your own.
In your experience, or maybe even what you have heard from other people that ran in your circles, what are some things that maybe queer individuals, were there any kind of unique challenges that you encountered them experiencing, and how can HR support them in those challenges?
Yeah. So, I started my career in a male-dominated industry. And so it wasn't even, it's just sharing anything personal in that space was not a comfortable space. And so I think it's just like a slowly evolved the workplace, which I'm thankful that we're at a much better space in a lot of ways. But I think we still have a lot of ways we can improve upon. But, we saw the DEI movement, in 2019-ish, 2020-ish, where I think companies did take more initiative to build some of these policies and spaces for a wide variety of people, whether it be BIPOC, LGBTQ plus, making sure that we are supporting employees from every aspect. Like we said, making sure people are comfortable, bringing them their authentic selves.
It's all about doing things that promote inclusion and belonging in whatever setting you're in. And it may not necessarily mean queer individual.
I mean, I think one of those things is, right, one of the things I loved was every morning I see the same people in the break room, grabbing a cup of coffee in the morning and just like, hey, how was your weekend? Like truly having that just connecting time. That's how I built a lot of my relationships, was just seeing people in passing and, being able to share, hey, me and my wife, we did this over the weekend. I think that is a conversation that a lot of LGBTQ plus people have not been open about. They haven't felt comfortable. So I have seen that in the workplace, that depending on the person, depending on the group that they're with, they don't always share that kind of thing that, we all are. We're sharing. And I wanted to make sure people were comfortable with me and being a space that they can share that.
No, I do think that makes all the difference in how people experience HR, is if that HR individual is being visible and showing that they are human as well, and that it is okay to engage in conversations with them about your life. And it doesn't always have to be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to I don't know. For me, sometimes it felt like, oh, I have to go see the principal. I have to go to their office and I have to tell them this big thing. But I also, I've had experiences where I've also been able to say, hey, I need to go check in with them and just say, hey, I'm sure you had a busy day. Hope you have a better one tomorrow. So that human side of them, I think
absolutely
we need more of.
Yeah.
When we're talking about building inclusive and safe spaces in any kind of setting, what role do our leadership people play?
I think that's going to vary based on what type of industry you're in, what size of organization. There's a lot of factors at play there, but my experience has been you're going to need the very top leadership support.
to be able to truly make an inclusive work environment. The way that they're leading meetings, the way that they're leading their people, and that hierarchy, right, is it's a top down culture
It
of
really
something like
is.
that. When DEI really took off, we sat down with our leadership to have these conversations of why this is important, right? Why we're doing these things. One, also, do you understand what these terms mean, right? Even
That
just
is
like
so
going through that dialogue.
important.
Yeah,
Yes, that is
because
so
not everyone
important.
maybe truly understands that, especially white cis male, the predominant leadership that I have supported, they may not have a front row seat to a lot of these things that we're trying to help support.
I love that. It is so important. Sometimes it is being able to take that step back and say, this is something we want to work towards, but let's figure out what it means first before we just jump in and say, yes, we're going to support it. Let's have a conversation about what that means to us, what that might look like, so that we can move forward. And hopefully develop policies and promote healthy boundaries as a workplace culture. I think can make all the difference.
Yeah,
in my personal experience, at least. Speaking of policies, how important is it to make sure that your policies also align with what you are verbalizing?
I think if you say one thing and you maybe take some baby steps, right, towards implementing some of these updates, these policies, these culture shifts, right? I think we said we had to meet people where they were, right? And so if we're talking about our white cis male leaders, we had to meet them where they were to an extent, right? And so one, it's educating them. It's saying, here's easy things we can do right now that don't cost money, because money is sometimes a sticking point, right?
Ooh, can we pause on that? And what are some of those, I guess, baby step things for people who may have a minimal budget or, it's maybe a smaller leadership team that there is a lot of sort of really tiny baby steps that are being taken?
That's things like updating your employee handbook. I cannot tell you, in every single organization I've worked with, all of them said he, she, it's the gender, the pronoun, right, component of something so easy to just switch out they or the employee. It's a very small step, but it's an inclusive step that we can take. When we're sending that to a new hire, they kind of know where we stand. They know what the way that we're thinking. So it's looking at your policies from that lens, that perspective. Dress code policies is something that I have pushed so much.
Oh my gosh, yes.
When I first started working at one of my companies, it was like males could not have ear piercings. And I was like, why? Or men could not have long hair. And I was like, why? We work with external clients. And so it was more about just a grooming perspective. I'm like, well, we can talk about a grooming perspective if it becomes an issue. Like, we do want to present ourselves as a professional, place, but the length of your hair does not matter in that space. It's what you deliver as an employee. So just things like that, I mean, can move the needle, right?
No, that I think we've touched on those things before on previous shows, and just saying, like, even just like email signatures and including pronouns in your email signature.
There are conversations that happen around that approval from leadership, right? Because they didn't understand it from the beginning of why is this important? Things like employee resource groups. So even if you are a small organization, if you don't have kind of these formal ERGs, kind of what they're called, if you don't have that formal group setting, have the first Friday of the month be like, bring your lunch. We'll go meet, or we can go across the street and grab some lunch, and kind of just form your own employee resource group. I mean, we're all going to lunch probably at some point. Hopefully you're taking a break from your desk, grab a cup of coffee, right, with these group of people. But that's pretty much a no cost way of just getting people together.
When we feel like we have those meaningful connections with our coworkers, and Megan and I have shared our own experiences just around how we feel like it even improves productivity. right? Because you are feeling like you belong in that setting. And so you're more likely to be also passionate about the work that you guys are doing together. I love that. What are some maybe, I guess, medium level types of things that we could see happen?
I think ERGs, employee resource groups, investing money into those groups, having them bring in a speaker, having them be able to go to a conference. There are so many things out there that is an investment in your employee to spend money on them to go to maybe this conference and come back and educate your other employees. That is something that we did in my past with my past employers, is sharing those resources. We can't send everyone, but we can send maybe one or two people and bring back these resources to our organization, get some great ideas, network with other organizations, see how they're doing things.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And the social worker in me just got like rainbows just shot up into the sky, because one thing that we for sure have talked about on the show is the importance of self-care and making sure that you feel valued in the workplace, because then you're going to feel valued in yourself. And so having a workplace that is investing and showing that they care is also going to improve the mental health quality of your employees.
Mental wellness is so important. And I think, I mean, it all ties together, right?
It does.
We have to have all of these things. And
It does.
a lot of companies have very lean resources, right? And so they may not be the expert in some of these areas. And so you bringing some of this to them can help them if it's something that's not on their radar, or a bandwidth, right? I think a lot of us just get so stretched in our positions, and things like updating your employee handbook, I'll tell you, they take the back burner. Those are because that is something that just doesn't become a priority, even though it can make a difference. We deal with the things that are on fire in the moment, right? And so you coming to HR, you expressing that these things are important to you as the employee, that can really put some weight behind what their priorities are. And so if you're not getting employee surveys, if you're not being asked for feedback from your manager for anything like that, go to them. They definitely value your input.
I just continue to be drawn to, what prompted Megan and I to start this podcast in the first place was our experience with workplace toxicity and not having access to an HR person. We were one of those smaller organizations that did not have HR. HR was a system that was operated by the CEO. And so we didn't feel like we had this. We just had each other kind of going through it. But I am curious, in a perfect world, there is at least one HR person, or there's at least a system, checks and balances where employees can still reach out when they are dealing with something. And I know a lot of our listeners have experience with feeling discriminated against, being harassed, being mistreated in the workplace. What are some things that HR can do to help alleviate some of those microaggressions or full-blown aggressions that people might be experiencing in the workplace, and maybe don't feel like it's getting the attention that it needs?
I think it goes back to that education piece a lot. Having these lunch and learns, having these corporate mandated training sessions that one, educate you of what is a microaggression, what does that look like, what are you using these terminology currently, what spaces are you using them in. I think if it's a harassment thing, definitely go to HR. I will tell you that the majority of them will investigate that and get feedback from all the parties, but typically you all remain anonymous to an extent. But if it's between you and one other party, that anonymity only goes so far.
Right.
But I don't want you to be afraid to go to HR because of that, because they really are there to help you and make sure that you are not exposed to that again, especially because we don't want you in that environment, right? To continuously deal with harassment in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've said it on the show before, right? No one should be being harassed in their place of work. And if you are, we want you to feel comfortable going to someone and advocating for yourself to be treated right. And hopefully your workplace has a system in place to address those concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the smaller organizations I've worked for do have those systems in place. So I think the majority, unless you're dealing with a group that maybe has zero HR, right? Then maybe you are lacking some of those policies. Is there an anti-harassment? Is there an anti-discrimination policy, a statement on your website? Like, look at those. And if they are not fully encompassing, right, for sexual orientation, for all these gender topics, like, bring that to their attention, that those things need to be looked at deeper.
As we're sitting here talking about this, and it's kind of all, best case scenario, everyone has a great system in place at their work. They have a wonderful HR person, but we are in a state that does not tend to have policies and laws that protect our queer individuals in a variety of spaces, not just work. So I'm wondering, how does that sometimes factor into how discrimination is handled in the workplace?
So I'll share that all of the organizations I've worked for have worked across numerous states. And so have typically taken a broader approach. So that's kind of been the environment that I've been in. But you're absolutely right. I mean, HR should, again, best case scenario, you have at least one dedicated HR person that they are at least keeping an eye on legislation that passes, because things come up all the time from every direction of employment law related things that we have to make updates to policies. And Texas has particularly taken some steps to make things like this difficult, completely removing DEI from college campuses, and people that work in that space no longer, and students especially, no longer have some of those resources. And so you have to be very creative of how can you support people now that we have all these guardrails, right? And I think that's a very sticky thing. But again, we're all human, and I think having this one-on-one dialogue can go so far. But if you are in that space that you maybe don't have those resources, find a friend, find someone who knows someone maybe who can at least give you a little bit of guidance on maybe how to maneuver a discrimination or a harassment situation if you don't have maybe some of the support in place. Because you shouldn't have to go through that alone either.
Sometimes it's also just helpful to even practice talking to the leadership or HR person. Because, oftentimes when we have experienced discrimination, we operate in our emotional headspace. And so sometimes being able to get that out with those friends, those allies, can help us then approach our leadership not without emotion. We still need that emotion. We're still going to have those feelings, but we can also maybe gather our thoughts a little bit before we go into that meeting so that we are heard in the way that we want to be heard. And hopefully we feel helped and validated in that conversation.
I mean, I completely agree with what you just shared. I think, like we said too, is getting familiar with your policies. If you come with your data, with your evidence of like, hey, this happened, we have this in place, how can you support me in working through this issue that just came up? Because this is how I felt. This is how it made me feel. This is what I'm still dealing with from this situation. I think those are the they're going to look for fact-based things, even though it is very emotional when something like that happens to anyone. And I think the emotion is powerful too, because that also shows that this truly did, hurt you. This truly did make an impact on you. And again,
I also think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes it can be something that was even unintentional. Maybe, updating the employee handbook did get put on the back burner because there were other fires brewing that we had to take care of. And because of that, it led to someone experiencing something that they shouldn't have experienced. And so then being able to take that experience to the leadership, to HR, and say, this just happened to me. What can we do so that it doesn't happen again?
Mm-hmm.
And that's maybe when it's like, oh, you know what? Us updating that handbook, it's a fire now.
Yep.
We
And
got
I
to
think,
take care of that.
yeah. And I mean, every person, every employee is different and maybe
Mhm.
what they're looking for and the type of support and what kind of resolution maybe they're seeking. So just share with them your feedback too of, it made me feel XYZ. I'd really like to see, why happen, how can we work through this and get to that state? Because yeah, we don't know all the things, right? We don't know it all either. And so any feedback that you have or suggestions you have of how we can approach things, and it goes a long way.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing some of this great insight with us. I'm sure that we could continue coming up with questions and talking through all of these things, but I think you've given us a lot of great tools and tips to help us navigate HR, maybe with a different lens than we previously did.
We're not scary. We're not all scary.
Well, and I think that's important, right? We've talked on this show about mental health before and that there's a huge stigma around mental health, but sometimes HR also has that stigma. And so I think you've done a great job at helping us start to break down that stigma a little bit and not feel so nervous.
Yeah.
So, Do Good Books, you've got access to all these wonderful books. Is there a current book you're reading right now that you are like super excited about that you would like other people to read?
So I am binge reading. It's called The Testament, and it is the second book of The Handmaid's Tale. So I read The Handmaid's Tale over the summer, and so I finally got my hands on a copy of The Testament. And so I am towards the end of that, hoping to finish it. A lot of people don't realize there's a second one, and so I'm kind of putting the pieces together. And so this week is actually Banned Books Week.
Yes.
So I had a lot of books on my list this year to get through. So Handmaid's Tale was one of those. That is a banned book.
Yes, Alissa will be at Pride Frisco, and she will have some of her books available that I think, have I seen you be promoting that it will be some of the banned books?
Yes. So I usually always have some. I've been pushing them hard the last week or so, and I have some more this week. So I'm hoping to restock and have some good banned books for you all too.
Yeah, and she has awesome books, you guys. I also know, and this is more so for my wife, so that she can maybe feel a little jealous. I don't know. So I saw on Instagram you were posting about Sharon McMahon's book.
Yes.
So my wife is a big fan of Sharon McMahon. Have you already started reading her book? Because it just
I
came
am not.
out.
I'm waiting on my order to come in along with all these great books I have for you all at Pride Frisco, but that will be our next Do Good Book Club read and discussion. So I'm so excited for that. So you can definitely check our website, our Instagram for how you can join our book club.
Lots of awesome books out there for you guys to check out. Thank you so much for joining in this conversation. Hopefully the first of many more to come about how we can navigate HR and get them to help us hold space for being inclusive, being treated right, and, being able to live our authentic selves in the workplace.
Yeah. So important. So thank you. Thank you, Maddie, for inviting me on. This was so great.
We will make sure to tag and Do Good Books on social media so you can make sure you are following her, and you can also chat with her in the community when she is out and about.
We have a lot going on in the next couple months, so definitely come see us.
Thank you.
I know,
Thank you,
it was so
Maddie.
fun.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was.
I really like that. I think it's awesome that she does bring up the responsibility that leaders have, right? That they, we have to educate. We have to get them to, before we even implement those policies, that we have to make sure that they have a full understanding of what it means to the employees, what it means to the success of their business, and also to their consumers too, right? It's make real change. Like, we need the leaders to be involved, and then it can move down, into the employees, or into the verse, so that they can thrive, right?
Right. Like if they see that their leader buys into it, then your employees are more likely to be inspired
Right.
to buy into it.
We all
So yeah, it was a really great discussion, and I'm so grateful that Alyssa was willing to share
thank you,
some
Alyssa.
of that HR perspective. If you have other sort of HR concerns that you want us to address in a later episode, please let us know. Share with us, because I think we all need some tools sometimes to help us navigate the environments that we're in. And so we want to make sure that we're getting you tools that you need.
That's what we're here for.
So Megan, I am feeling like I'm out of coffee, and I don't know. It was a long day for me.
I agree.
And I feel like I probably had way too much coffee.
I'm getting like that I keep drinking the coffee and I'm just like,
And nothing's happening.
Nothing's happening.
Thank you all for joining us for another great episode of Not a Lonely Coffee Break. We always love when you join us. Make sure that you are subscribed, that you are following us. You can find us on social media, leave us some comments, send us a message. We love having you guys join us. Again, I'm your host, Maddie.
And I'm Megan.
We'll see you next time. Cheers, queers!